Hello, my name is Stephan Delbos. I'm Director of Product Content at Mews, and today I'll be talking to you about designing release notes for maximum business impact. You can connect to my LinkedIn profile through the QR code, and I'd be happy to chat further. Today, I'll start by talking about the importance of aligning content efforts with business goals. Then we'll take a look at the definition of release notes in terms of how some contemporary product companies are using them. And then we'll turn to the potential value of release notes that I see and how to unlock that value to really drive business goals and drive the right user behaviors. Everything I'll be talking about, I've learned over the course of my career working at different types of product companies of different sizes and different industries. And really, these lessons that I've learned that I'll be sharing today are the results of my journey to product content enlightenment. And so, in the spirit of enlightenment, I'll start with a question for you. If a tree falls in the forest with no one to hear it, does it make noise? And to bring it a little closer to home for us, if a feature deploys without documentation, does it exist? Along the way, in my journey to product content enlightenment, I've asked these questions and I've come to satisfactory answers. And I hope by the end of this talk, you'll be closer to being able to answer those questions for yourself. And one thing that I think is very important to keep in mind in product content, whether you're a content designer, technical documentation specialist, whatever you might be doing in product content, it's really crucial to remember that product content is about people, the users, the team, and the business. These three groups need to be at the heart of every decision you make as a product content team. Because to grow and to support a content team, you have to take care of your people, your users, your team, and your business. And when we think about those three groups, it's the business that has the most power and authority to help you grow a content team. So to do that, to grow and support a content team, you have to align with business goals and show impact. You have to be able to explain how decisions about words and images and colors help drive business goals. And that's at the center of what I'm trying to do today. In order to get there, we have to be sure we're aligned on a definition of what content teams actually do. And this can vary from company to company, but there are some fundamentals. For me, product equals functionality plus content. The content that is produced by product content teams, again, whether they're content designers or technical documentation people, this is not extraneous to the product, it's part of the product. Even the driest, most technical piece of documentation is actually part of the product. It is what you're offering to users. So if a feature is deployed without that documentation, the product is incomplete. It hasn't been completed until the documentation is available. When we think about it, engineers create functionalities. They make the product do what it does. Content completes the product. And the work of content teams is to complete the product and offer it to users in the way that it should be offered. And that's really what I think content teams do. When we dig deeper into the purpose of product content, we can say that it's intended for current users, not prospective users. And this is an important differentiator between product content and product marketing. When we look at things like release notes, we see how product content announces new features and updates. When we think about help articles in the knowledge base, product content also instructs and guides the use of new and existing features. We've also seen that product content has a great value for customer support agents. They attach articles to emails when they're closing cases. They use the knowledge base to educate themselves on the latest features and their functionalities. And that provides great internal value as well. When we think about API documentation, we can see that product content also guides implementation partners who are different from the average everyday users of the product in many cases. And so what type of content do content teams produce in order to meet these goals? In our case at Mews, we're talking about release notes, help articles, technical customer communications, API docs, product tours, and content design microcopy. Today, I'll be focusing on release notes. So what are they? Let's take a look at how some companies use release notes and see where they're succeeding and where there's room for improvement. According to ChatGPT, release notes are documents or notifications that accompany software updates, new versions, or product releases. They provide information about the changes, improvements, bug fixes, and new features introduced. And generally, they include one or more of these 8 points. And when we look at how companies use release notes today, we can see, as I said, greater and lesser successes. Here's an example from Apple. Here we have a very minimalistic, basic release note for an iOS update. We have really the bare minimum of information. We don't have a lot of instruction. We don't have links to the knowledge base for further reading. We don't have a sense of value of the pain points being addressed by this update. There's no sense of enthusiasm or excitement. Seems like a very run-of-the-mill release note. The impression that I get when I read this is that the company doesn't see much value in release notes or purpose in investing in release notes. And also when I read this, I don't get the feeling of excitement that I get when I look at a product overview or an advertisement from Apple. And that is a missed opportunity. Slack does interesting things with their release notes. Again, very minimalistic like Apple's. We can see they're working with versioning. And if you look at the bottom, bug fixes, we tuned up the engine and gave the interiors a thorough clean. Everything is now running smoothly again. This is funny. It's very human. It has some of that great Slack tone of voice. It doesn't really tell me anything about the bug fix, what went wrong, what was improved, how to use it, what I should know. So that's a missed opportunity, but at least I get a laugh out of it. Here's an example of a release note from around the time I joined Mews. Rooming lists make group reservations a piece of cake. I like that idiomatic expression in the title. It's very human. It conveys some of that human tone of voice. We have download a rooming list from a group reservation, send it to guests for completion, then instantly import all of their details back to Mews. A really basic explanation of this feature, along with a link to the knowledge base, which helps create a closed content ecosystem for users to instruct themselves on new content. But I don't get a sense of urgency, I don't get a sense of excitement, and I don't get a sense really of the value of this release. So that's a missed opportunity. I love the visual, how it shows us the product and where this update is. That goes a long way to actively instructing users to use the new feature. But in all 3 of these cases, these example release notes we've seen, there are some good things happening, but there are a lot of missed opportunities. And when we think about those missed opportunities, we're thinking about the potential value of release notes. And I've put that potential in parentheses because, as we've seen, I think these are missed opportunities for most companies, even great companies like Apple and Slack. In my experience, there are 3 key elements of value for release notes. 1 is that it's a key customer touchpoint. 2 is that it can inform employees of updates. And 3, it can drive feature adoption. When we look at release notes as a key customer touchpoint, when done well, you'll see that the users really come to trust the release notes. They come to rely on the release notes, and release notes can be a 2-way communication touch point between users and the product teams. We've also seen that by sharing the release notes internally, they become a key way to inform employees of updates, to let people throughout the company know what we're releasing, when, why, and how it works. And this is something that we've seen bring massive value in keeping the entire company informed about new releases, which can be very difficult in large and complex organizations. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we'll see how release notes, when done well, can really have a positive impact on feature adoption, allowing users to adopt new features more quickly. So the question then becomes, how can we make release notes more effective? How can we unlock that potential value? And I want to outline 4 steps on this journey to more effective release notes, this journey to product content enlightenment. Step 1, bring release notes inside the product. Step 2, add scannable details, structure, brand style, and multimedia. Step 3, gather data and iterate. And step 4, share the good news. First, we bring the release notes inside the product. This example that I showed you was published on our release notes page, releases.mews.com. So when there was a new release note published at this time, there would be a notification in the product. The user would click on the notification. It would open a new tab in their browser. They would have to exit the product, go to the web page, read the release note, then go back to the product to try to apply what they've learned. So this creates a gap between the product and the documentation, which shouldn't be there because, as I said at the beginning, the documentation is part of the product. So we want to take this pull content, which is content that we're forcing users to go find, and we want to turn it into push content, content that comes to them. And that's what we've done by bringing the release notes inside the product. You can see now when we have a release note, the bubble pops up with the headline. The user can click on the bubble or on the icon, and it opens a sidebar where they can read the full release note. They can still link to that external web page if they would like to. And also, crucially, as we'll see, they can provide feedback in the form of emojis or a text feedback in the box. This has been revolutionary for us, and I think it's the first step toward more effective release notes. We've seen that by bringing release notes inside the product, more users can find the release notes faster. There's a closer connection between the documentation and the product. We've closed that gap. And there's increased engagement with release notes. The value of the release notes goes up. The trust and awareness of the release notes goes up, all by bringing them inside the product. Step 2, add scannable details, structure, brand style, and multimedia. This is where design comes in. So for our release notes, and here's the full example, you can see all of the design work we've done to implement very specific guidelines and structure to improve the readability of the release notes. You can see the emojis that we have from the title all throughout the release note. These make the text much more glanceable, easily distinguishable. Each of those emojis has specific connotations that users come to learn over the long term. We can see that we've broken the text up into bullet points and very short paragraphs, which again makes the text easier to read, quicker to digest. We've implemented a structure where we foreground the pain points and the value of these new features right at the beginning of the release note. So we're thrilled to introduce the Mews Digital Assistant, an AI-powered chatbot designed to elevate your Mews support experience. That's exactly what it is. Now get swift and accurate responses to your queries, so seeking support no longer means lengthy email exchanges. That's the pain point we're addressing. We put this information right at the beginning of the release note, even before providing more information, so the user knows right away why they should use this new feature, what problems it's going to solve. We then have that GIF, which walks the user through the process of using this new feature, in this case, the AI-powered customer support chatbot. And this is so much more instructional and informative than simply explaining in words how to use the feature or where they can find it. In the second half of the release note, we can see, again, the bullet points and the emojis. We're highlighting the key features that we've determined are the most important for users to know right away. You can see throughout the text, we're linking to the knowledge base so users can learn more. We end with a call to action. how they can give it a try and access the chatbot, and then a link to further reading. Then again, we have the opportunity for feedback at the end. So by implementing these design changes and these style guidelines, we've really increased the value of the release notes. We've made them easier to use, faster to digest, and all of that makes them more effective for users. So we found that by adding scannable details, structure, brand style, and multimedia, the content is more engaging. The content is easier and faster to use for the users. They find them faster and then they read them faster. And that means there's a shorter time to value for the release notes themselves, as well as for the features and updates that we're promoting. Step 3 is gather data and iterate. At this point, you might be asking yourself, what kind of data can we gather from release notes? Does anyone actually read release notes? This is something that I heard repeatedly when I joined Mews. No one reads release notes. Nobody cares about release notes. They don't matter. There's no value there. Don't worry about release notes. So this immediately made release notes seem like a massive opportunity for content, a place of high potential value that wasn't being realized. And in our case, the answer is yes. If done well, users definitely do read release notes. When I started in January 2021, we had about 2,000 monthly active users on our release notes. When we brought the release notes inside the product using a tool called Beamer in October 2021, that number of monthly active users jumped to about 20,000, and that has continued to increase month on month and year on year. In January of this year, we hit about 30,000 monthly active users, which is just over 70% of our monthly active users of the platform. So although you would expect the use of the release notes to scale as the user base grows, we can see that we're doing more than following those trends. We're covering a really large percentage of our monthly active users of the product. And these aren't views, these are monthly active users of the release notes. These are users who are coming back again and again to read the release notes because they see true value there. So certainly when done well, users will read release notes. But do they actually care about the release notes, or are they just a kind of necessary evil? We've found that users really do. We've leaned into community management through those opportunities for feedback that we get on the emojis in the text box. And we make an effort to respond to all relevant or what we call actionable comments. And we report on the sentiment in the commentary monthly. We pass this information on to the product teams, and it's very valuable for them. We found that by leaning into customer, or rather community engagement on the release note sentiment and comments, we've been able to increase the quality of the engagements. So something like very important for us, I'm very excited for this feature. That's interesting to know. It's good data in terms of judging the sentiment of this new release. Something like Trump for president isn't relevant. It's not what we call an actionable comment. We don't do much with that. But what we found is that by actively engaging with the comments, we've been able to drive up the quality of the comments, these actionable comments, which is a comment that contains a question or some other piece of relevant information that we can pass on to the users, to the product teams from the users. And we know that it's appreciated by the users as that engagement continues to increase. We also regularly report on the sentiment of new releases. Ultimately, our objective in monitoring the comments and the sentiment is to improve the release notes and to improve the product based on the feedback that we're getting. And so we report on this monthly, and we gamify it, where we list all the releases for the previous month in order from the highest sentiment to the lowest. And we found this is really engaging for product teams who kind of compete now to see who can get the highest sentiment on their releases, kind of competing on who can delight customers most, which is an amazing thing. So I've told you how we can gather this qualitative and quantitative data from the release notes. I've showed you how the release notes can really drive some good customer behavior, but how do release notes really benefit the business? How do they drive those business goals? The answer is through increased feature adoption. This is a graph monitoring feature adoption on a feature that was released at the beginning of January. We measure this through a tool called Gainsight, and you can see that when we published that release note between the 16th and the 17th, the feature adoption spikes significantly. Then there's a bit of a dip, but interestingly, we have this long tail of increased feature adoption. For us, we serve customers around the world in different time zones, customers who may or may not be logging on every day. And so that long tail represents as maybe a user didn't log in on Monday, they don't log in until Thursday. That's when they see the release note and use that new feature. So it's not just a spike that goes up and comes back down. Overall, and over the long term, the release notes clearly have a positive impact on feature adoption. And we see this again and again. Here, we publish the release note on the 21st. We have that really nice spike over the next couple of days, and then a dip, but then that long tail of increased feature adoption. We've seen that we can double our average feature adoption in the first week or two by having a well-designed and well-published, timely published release note. And this, for me, is a silver bullet for content teams trying to show their business impact. It's a direct correlation between decisions in product content and increased feature adoption, which is a goal of every product company. So by gathering qualitative and quantitative data, we've been able to increase the engagement and the trust of our users with our release notes and with our content and our product more broadly. They see that we're paying attention to their comments and iterating upon them and interacting with them, and that increases trust. We've also been able to have a more visible impact by having that data, having that sentiment, having those graphs on feature adoption. We're able to very, very clearly show the impact that our release notes have with users. And ultimately, this helps us make smarter decisions based on that feedback, both in terms of the release notes themselves, as well as future updates in the product. The final step is perhaps the most important: share the good news. So you've gathered all this data. What are you going to do with it? What we've done is create a Slack channel where we publish all the new release notes, as well as any new guides or updated guides that come along with that new feature update, and any background documentation, Confluence pages, Jira tickets. Here we aim to provide a complete overview of every new release, linking to the release note itself, but also that supporting documentation as well. And we have hundreds of people in this channel. And what we've found is that teams throughout the company use this as their single source of truth to stay informed about what we're releasing, when we're releasing it, how it works, and what pain points it's addressing. I've realized that with our content designers and technical writers embedded in all of our product teams throughout the organization, we have a total overview of what all the different teams are releasing, when, and why. And this overview is extremely valuable, especially in large and complicated organizations. It can be really difficult to figure out what's being released and when, and how it works, and what customer needs it's addressing. So this channel has become a great platform, not only for us to promote ourselves and bring value internally through the company, but also to increase the awareness throughout the company of what the product teams are doing. These turn into threads where we might have the CEO commenting on a new release, asking questions about the documentation, making suggestions for future iterations of the feature. And we've even spun off into new ideas based on conversations that we've had here in this channel. So by sharing the good news, we've increased the visibility of our team. More people know what we're up to. More people know the value that we're bringing. We've increased the visibility of what the product teams are releasing. We've brought value by informing the entire company about the releases that we're deploying. And ultimately, we've been able to get more support for our efforts because we've become a very visible and central team in terms of company communication. So these are the 4 steps to more effective release notes. And I want to just briefly review what I see as the potential value that these 4 steps will unlock. We've seen that when done well, release notes act as a key customer touchpoint. Customers come to rely on release notes to be informed and instructed about new releases and feature updates, and they use the release notes as a two-way communication touchpoint between themselves and the product teams, which is extremely valuable. We've also driven value by using the release notes to inform our own employees of the updates and using them as a single source of truth for what we're releasing, when and why, and how it works. And ultimately, and perhaps most importantly, we've been able to show that the release notes help drive feature adoption, which is a goal of any company. So if there's only one takeaway from today, it is that you should be measuring feature adoption, and you should be measuring the difference in feature adoption before and after you publish release notes. Unlocking that value is about the 4 steps that I've outlined here. Bringing release notes inside the product, adding details, structure, and multimedia, gathering data and iterating, and finally sharing the good news. So this talk today has been about my journey to product content enlightenment, but it's really about your journey in taking those steps to bring more value to your organization. And you have to remember that product content is about people, the users, the team, and the business. And keeping these groups at the heart of everything you do is crucial. Because to grow and support a content team, you have to take care of your people, your team, your business, and your users. And ultimately, you have to align with business goals and show your impact. And hopefully I've showed you some ways to do that today. And as you proceed through your journey to product content enlightenment, you want to remember that product equals functionality plus content. It's another mantra for you to remember. And I hope you're closer to an answer to this question. If a feature deploys without documentation, does it exist? It doesn't exist because the documentation is part of the product. And without those release notes, the feature adoption is lower. People don't know what the features are and how to use them. Because ultimately, if your product releases don't make noise, you're not doing it right. Thank you very much. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Would be happy to chat further, and enjoy the rest of the conference.